Hey everyone, welcome to this advanced API debugging session. We're going to talk about everything API debugging in Postman from client server side, but Joyce is going to tell you all about it. I'm very much here just to help with running the webinar. Turns out we were meant to have Sean run that session, but he couldn't join, so I'm just filling in. My name is Alemi. I'm a senior developer advocate at Postman, and I'm here with Joyce.
Hi, everyone. I'm the head of developer relations at Postman. And we were saying good morning earlier, but it occurs to me that we have people joining in from all around the world. So good morning, good day, good evening.
Exactly. So yeah, let's jump straight into it. Advanced API debugging. There's a few things that we're going to go through. 5 main ones. We first start by talking about understanding API behavior. It's better to understand what's happening before you start debugging. I'm guessing you can learn from debugging how it works as well, but we work through what's the typical API behavior. We'll look at some debugging practices when it comes to how, but also with what tools, debugging strategies, and then we'll share some extra resources so you can refer to it later or just to learn more than what you've learned during this webinar. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning during the housekeeping, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Feel free to ask all your questions during the webinar. There's the Q&A button at the bottom. But if I don't answer them through chat, they'll be answered at the end. With that said, let's learn from you. We'll teach you a few things, but there's a few things we want to know from you. So I'm going to prompt a little poll that should show on your screen now. 2 questions. The first one being, what is your primary area of focus? Are you doing mostly development, mostly testing? Are you mostly consuming APIs, maybe like partner APIs or public APIs, or are you doing none of this? We might tailor the content a bit based on the answers, but we usually have the same type of attendees. The second question is, how much experience do you have using Postman? It can be no experience at all. That's the first time you hear about Postman, maybe because you arrived here by mistake, which is fine. Stick around. Maybe you use Postman frequently, but not the advanced features of it. And that's one thing we notice as well. Like whenever we talk about Postman, there's many features that people don't know about. So hopefully we can teach you some today. And then maybe you know so much you could write a book about it. Maybe you've already written a book about it. Some people have. And with that said, I see we already have, everyone answered. That's 100%.
Excellent work, team.
That's like, never had that before. So I'll end the poll and I'll show the results so you can all see what's happening there. So we have 40% of people that are doing mostly development, 50% of people that are doing mostly testing, and then 9% mostly consuming APIs. We have a little 1% doing none of these. Hopefully we'll get you interested in that and maybe you'll move into one of the other categories. The second question, we have mostly just Postman users, not using advanced feature, but just using Postman on a regular basis. 3 of you have written a book, so please share it. And then we have a few beginners, and that's fine. That session is for everyone. So let's move on to the next slide and see the learning objectives. So what we want you to learn during this session, what we expect you to live with at the end of the session. First thing, you should be able to explore methods for understanding API behavior. I mentioned that during the agenda. So that includes updating user inputs and based on that, changing the API response. Should be able to debug and troubleshoot unexpected behavior. You might be coding an API that responds with not what you expect, and you should be able to understand what's happening there and debug it. Establish visibility for monitors, webhook, and CLI. Isolate dependencies with mock servers, set up notifications and alert, and explain recommended strategies for debugging. Plenty of stuff. If that doesn't all make sense, I'm sure Joyce will make that make sense for you later. And with these learning objectives done, let's get started and start walking you through how to get started. So I mentioned at the beginning, this is a follow along session. You may just want to watch, and that's fine. You can just sit back, relax, and watch Joyce do the work, or you can follow along. So there's a workspace where we have all the collections that we use during these webinars that you can fork and then use. So I'm going to walk you through that. There's a link at the top here, but I'll also show you how to find the collection through the UI. So let me open Postman. Someone's already posted the link in the chat. I see it. So that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Daksh.
So you should be seeing my Postman window.
Yes.
Cool. So this is my Postman account. You can see there's some stuff happening in the activity feed, etc. I'm going to go ahead and look for the Postman Spacecamp workspace. So I'm in the search at the top of the window here. I'll type in Spacecamp. And this should be the first one popping up. So you can see that's a workspace. It's from Postman. That's us. It's called Postman Spacecamp. So go ahead, go here. And then the first collection on the left sidebar should be the one we're looking for today, called Advanced API Debugging. So I can click on it, and there's a fork button right here. So this little 3-dot and branches thing. So I can click on it and bring it to my workspace. So if you're following along, give it a name. It can be a meaningful name, doesn't have to be. I'll call this one webinar, and I'll fork it to my team workspace. So there's a little...
I would encourage everyone to fork this because it looks like who's in the room. There's a bunch of people of varying familiarity with Postman. And so we're going to be going over all the sections together. However, if you want to skip ahead or you want to spend more time on a certain part, you should have it in your local environment.
Good point. There's a little tick box here called Watch Original Collection. So let's say we update the collection later and you forked it, you'll get a notification if we make changes to it. So that's a good thing to keep on. And I'm actually going to keep it on and click fork. So this brings it to your workspace. It should redirect you to where the collection has been forked. And you're then ready to get started. So with that, hopefully you're all ready to get started. Joyce is ready to get started. So I'm going to give it to Joyce and she's going to walk through the collection.
Me? Okay. And it looks like we do have a question in the chat. If you have questions, go ahead and post them in the Q&A portion. Yeah. And I'm going to stop looking because I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay. So I've already forked, similar to what you just saw Arlemy do. I've already forked Advanced API Debugging to this workspace. It's actually a public workspace, so you can follow along here if you want. But I'm going to start and bring it to the top of my sidebar because it is a little bit junky. It's getting a little crowded in there. And the way this is set up right now is it's a collection with 3 folders. And so we'll be going over 3, what I call like features, but we'll also be going through workflows as we go dive into each feature. So there's the client. And if you're brand new to Postman, you probably know Postman at least by reputation as an API client. We will be going over the console and then also mock servers as it relates to debugging. So mock servers, I know we've had past webinars where we go over mocks, but we'll be talking about that in the context of debugging and testing. Are you ready, Arlemy? Ready to start?
I am ready.
Okay. So the way you go about doing this, and if you have to leave the webinar for whatever reason, again, we do have the recording, but you can also walk through this collection on your own. So there is a little bit of documentation at the collection level. And if you're not familiar with documentation, that's this right context bar. You can go ahead and see how to get started very quickly. You'll see those learning objectives that Arlemy went over. And then on the right side, you might see additional resources. So for every folder that we're walking through, make sure you check out the documentation because there's going to be some helpful wayfinding, additional resources and guidance possibly in the documentation. Okay, so let me close the documentation and go over to the client. So now here's the client folder. The very first thing I have queued up is a request. Arlemy was talking about understanding API behavior, and most of debugging is understanding what inputs affect the output, tweaking inputs, and seeing what kind of output you get. And that's where Postman, everyone knows Postman from. It's the API client side. So I just have a very basic Pokemon API because Arlemy loves Pokemon. And so I just wanted to show something that kept him interested. And you can see here's the response I'm getting from the bottom. And if you're not familiar with Postman, you see here's the HTTP method, you see the request URL, you actually see some query params that I can then tweak to impact the output. I'm tweaking the input to inspect the output rather. And then right away we see HTTP status code. This is going to be the number one thing that you're going to look at, this or an error message if you have a good API that you're working with, is the HTTP status code and the message that comes back. So in this case, it's a 200 OK. And if you're not familiar with status codes, you can hover over that and inspect what's going on. So 200 OK, there's really not much to debug here, but if I don't understand how this API is working, let's go on to the next example. And feel free to chime in, Arlemy, anytime. And I know, thank you so much for stepping in last minute to help with this webinar. Okay, so here we have variables. So if you're not familiar with this syntax, the double curly braces syntax is in the text areas of Postman is how you can reference variables. So it looks like I have a variable. Actually, I don't have a variable. I'm trying to reference a variable called number limit, and there's a typo in there already. So let me go ahead and update that. And I'm hovering over it and I can see it's unresolved. It's not been defined yet. I'm trying to reference it, but it hasn't been defined. And I mean, that's a good part of something not working in Postman. You're trying to reference a variable that is actually not the variable that you think. So if I go ahead and hit send, in this case, I didn't actually need these parameters. However, by hovering over variables, you're able to gain a little bit more insight into variables. So we're actually going to talk about 3 ways to reference variables. This is number 1. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so we have a different endpoint we're trying to hit now. This one's GitHub, and I'm trying to get the repos. Okay, you can look under the tabs here. I have no green dots, which means I have nothing to look at, nothing interesting here. No additional information is being sent in this request. And when I hit send, I can see I have a 200 OK. So a lot of times when we are exploring or writing tests, we want to make sure we have a successful response. That could be a 200 OK. If you're posting something and creating a new entity, that could be a 201. This is the base case. This is what we expect, something positive, some sort of 200 level status code. And actually, this is what I want when I'm working with the GitHub API. I'm looking at repos, going to this org, which happens to be Postman Lab. And now I can inspect the response here. Okay. Well, I thought you said this was going to be a webinar on debugging. This all is happy path scenario so far. Let's take a look at example not found.
Break it. I want to see it break.
Whoa. Okay. So now we have a not found 404. If you're browsing the internet, you've probably come across a 404 before. This page is not found. This entity is not found. And so right away, I'm like, okay, well, not found. What would I look at? Well, let's see what's in the documentation. If you receive 404, verify the resource you're trying to access is correct. So what do I mean by resource? Honestly, I just have a typo here. So instead of /repo, it should be /repos. Okay, so now I'm doing a little bit more inspection and now I get my 200. Let me X out of that because I don't want to accidentally save anything and be like, why am I not getting a 404? Okay, so let me close some of these tabs just to clean it up a bit. Okay, we're getting into more dangerous territory now, and we have an unauthorized. So I'm trying to hit the GitHub API, trying to get /user, and I get a 401 unauthorized. This requires authentication. So let me look at the documentation. Okay, so 401 unauthorized means that the next step in my debugging process should be verifying the authentication method required. I have the right authentication method. In this case, I probably need to attach an authorization header, maybe with a private token. I've literally not authed this request yet. And it's important to note that 401 is different than 403. 403 forbidden means you've done the authentication correctly, but you're not authorized. You're like double check your permissions and scopes. So, I mean, I should mention all of these HTTP status codes are based on what the API engineer wanted to return. So if they wanted to return 200 OK in every case, that's not going to be helpful. So if you're an API designer, of course, try to make use of status codes that make sense, that are canonically useful, and also your error message. So GitHub has not only used a nice HTTP status code in their response, they've also included a documentation URL. Oh, maybe Joyce doesn't know how to get the authenticated user. This is really helpful. So what I'm doing is I'm inspecting the HTTP status code and I'm inspecting the message that comes back. Okay, and we have one more sad sack example, and this is connection refused. And all of these examples are, if you're a novice, this might be new to you. If you're an old hat, this is like, of course I know how to do this, but this comes directly from our forum and questions that we get on Stack Overflow and on our community forum. So now I'm going to hit localhost 3000. Depending on your local environment, you will get a different result. So I'm going to hit send. And I see error connection refused. And this is because I personally don't have anything running on my local machine on port 3000. Okay, so go ahead.
I was going to say, shouldn't this be a 404 if there's nothing running?
So typically, if your server is not running, you just get a this error connection refused. There's literally nothing to hit.
Oh yeah, as in like it doesn't even exist. It's not. Yeah. There's not even a host. Okay.
There's no application running on my local server. Correct. Yeah. Okay, so feel free to ask your questions because we are about to leave client land and enter console. Oh no. Okay. Let me know if I should slow down or go over something, Arlemy, because I'm just going through the hands-on portion. Okay.
No, I think that's fine.
Okay. So we are about to leave client land and we're about to move on to our next feature. That is my personal favorite feature in Postman. It's not glamorous, but it saves my butt so many times. It's the console. Okay. So the console, if you're not familiar with it, there's a couple different ways to get to the console. There's a keyboard shortcut. I'm in the web. So I'm just going to show you my favorite way to get to the console. It's in the bottom left. You should see an icon called console. And when you expand it, you can actually see all the requests that I've been running, a history of my network calls. Okay, let me clear this and let's load up our first post call to Postman Echo, which is just a demonstration API that Postman has to echo back what we send it. So I'm going to hit send. And lo and behold, here is our humble but powerful network call. And if you're familiar with DevTools, like in Chrome DevTools or any other DevTools, this is a very similar look and feel. Something that is relatively new is this network area. If you expand this, you can actually see the network details. I won't expand any of this because I'm not sure what's secret to show on this webinar, but I will let you dig into that on your own environment. And then you also have a view of request headers, request body, and response headers and response body. And so this is a place where I like to go, where I'm like, what? Okay, I see this in Postman because Postman has this nice graphical user interface with data editors that I can really piece out all the stuff that I'm sending in my request. But what actually did send? Here is a very concise view of, a lot of times I'm able to see string substitution errors or unresolved variable errors because I can see the exact request URL that's being hit. I can see the headers, inspect all that. And if this is too pretty for me and I'm like, well, what is Postman making it super pretty? You can actually see on the right side a raw view of what is actually being sent from Postman. Too pretty.
Yeah. I was going to say, if you really don't like it when it's easy, you can click raw log and then see the raw view.
Yes. Well, and some people do like to see the raw view, and just understanding how Postman is formatting it can be helpful.
It does make it easier if you're trying to export it and then search into it, because then you can just copy the whole thing at once instead of like expanding everything one by one.
Yes.
But yeah, from my experience, it's just much easier to use it this way.
I agree. I seldomly look at the raw area, but I think it's worth calling out. So here's one network call, but as you continue working in Postman, let's go to the next one. As you continue working in Postman, this starts getting a little cluttered. And so there is some ability to filter on type of logs. And what is type of log? Let's see. We actually haven't seen a single log. This is just our network call. So let's go over to message type. Again, we're hitting echo. but I do see some green dots. Let's take a look at what's under there. So under the pre-request script tab, this is JavaScript that runs before your main request is sent. I have a couple different log types. I have a warn, log, info, and error. This is going to hit before our main network call. And then in the body, I'm just saying, hello world. Let's send this. And right away, you can see here's our network call. This is the second time we sent it. And we can expand this and drill down there. But you can see in the pre-request script, you can see the execution order, and you can also see the types of statements. And now if this becomes junky because it's becoming too much to filter through, you can actually say, hey, I don't care about warnings. I just care about errors, or I don't care about like whatever. You can drill down. So execution order, you can see in the in this console. And then also, remember I was saying you can drill down into information in that network call. So in this call, we actually sent a request body. So you can, of course, drill down on your response body, but also see what did Postman send. Okay, so let's move on to
that would be useful when you're using variables, for example, right? Because here it's the exact same in the UI and in the console.
It is. So we do have an example coming up where we get more deep with variables under more variables. But I actually want to go over this one before we go there, because this one's pretty neat and a lot of people don't know about it, is that you can send this main request because Postman makes it super easy to send your primary call, your main thing that you're wanting to explore in this bar here. But you can also send requests from inside scripts. So again, we have a green dot. Let's take a look at this green dot. You can send an asynchronous call either before in the pre-request script or after in the tests tab. And in this case, I'm going to send this main network call. And then the execution order is that after this main call sends, I'll send another request. So the first one's going to be foo1 bar 1. And the second request is going to be foo banana, foo pineapple. So I'm going to clear this just for the sake of clarity and send. And you can see here's the primary network call. And then it's a little hard to see on this in this screen, but this is slightly gray. Like the syntax highlighting for asynchronous calls is it's slightly less, I don't know that word, less contrast. And so, okay, so now I see that this is executed afterwards. And once again, I can drill down into my calls and see the execution order. Okay, and now Arlemy, impatient Arlemy is saying, yeah, I love inspecting variables. How is Postman resolving that variable? I assume it's this way, but did I have a typo? Am I just misassuming something? I don't know that word.
Sorry for spoilers.
Spoiler. Okay, so now we're hitting that same post. Let's look at what we have under the green dots. So we have a pre-request script that is going to set a collection level variable, strawberry and broccoli. And then it's going to go, so I'm just following the execution order from earliest to next. I'm going to pass through a body, and body is going to be fruit of the day that I set in pre-request and vegetable of the day. Can't forget about vegetables. And then after the main request sends with that body, I'm going to, let's take a look at this. I'm going to parse the response, what I get back from the endpoint. I'm going to assign it to a local variable called fruit and vegetable. And then I'm going to, it looks like drill down into an array. And then I'm going to log dynamic log statements, dynamically meaning I've set a variable in the same script, and then I'm going to print it out to the console. Okay, so we have in our mind, there should be something that happens pre-request setting of a variable. I'll be sending those variables in my request body. And then after the main request gets sent and I receive a response, I'm going to be setting some variables and logging stuff to the console. Let me clear this because that might be a lot of logs. Okay, so we set some variables in the pre-request script, and now in the body, I'm going to expand. What do we think we sent in that body, request body? okay, these are the variables that we set in the pre-request script, strawberry and broccoli, if you remember that. Let's collapse this. And here's our dynamic log statements. My second favorite is nectarine. God, I'm like getting hungry. I should not have used fruits for this example. And I have this many favorites. So I'm calculating the length of that array. And in fact, if I look at what I'm parsing, here's that information that's coming back. It's very small because I have many panes open, but that is indeed the information that I echoed back from the server. So there's a couple different places to inspect variable values. We saw when I hovered over a variable in the text editor, like if I had like this, you can hover over to look at the tooltip. You can log something to the console to inspect it a little bit deeper like this. And then I'm using collection variables, but you can also inspect if I had an environment, you can use the environment quick look. I'm hovering here on the top right, or you can just drill down into the environments tab to take a look at global and environment variables. So that's 3 places where you can inspect and drill down deeper to see what are variables that you've defined or not defined. Okay, we're getting like kind of deep into this, but this is advanced.
Yeah, the questions are pretty advanced as well. That's why I'm not really chiming in.
Okay, good. I'll let you answer all the questions, Arlemi. But Arlemi, let me know if I should focus more time, if you just see I should focus more time. Let's go into, I told you console is my favorite feature because it's so powerful. And
so, one thing you could mention as you're working with variables is a quick talk about variable scopes and where you're pulling your variables from.
Yes. Okay. So variable scope is something that I think in programming, you have different variable scopes. And if you have should I just run the variable scopes off the top of my head? So global scope is the widest scope. And you have scope resolution where the narrower the scope, the higher priority it gets. So if you have the same named variable in global scope and say local scope will take precedence. And so you have global, you have environment, then you have collection, and then you have local.
I'm cheating. Okay. So I'm just going to say okay. It's global, collection, environment, data, if you have a file, and then local. Yeah. Yes. And I've just sent the link to that.
There's a nice infographic for it to keep it straight. Yeah.
Thank you.
And so, I mean, we could have a whole webinar on variables. Like, when do you want to use variables? Which type of variable? So if you have a global variable, that might be something that a global variable is set at the workspace level. And that is stuff that you might use very frequently. So my name, if I use my name a lot or a username, and I'll just set it at a global level. And that way I can just use that global variable throughout my collection, like any different thing. And if I have something that I want to share with somebody else, I might separate it into a environment variables. If I have different configurations, environment's good for that. An environment is portable, so I can give it to somebody else, I can share it with somebody else, but I can also use it across collections. Okay, sorry, I could get sidetracked on variables. Let's go on to the last console because this is my favorite feature. Let's go on to conditional breakpoints. And this is conditional statements, but also conditional breakpoints. Okay, so let's look under where we have green dots. What are we going to do? Okay, we're doing the same thing, except this time we're setting collection variables as avocado and spinach. Again, we're sending it through in the body. So we're dynamically sending a body based on what we set in the pre-request script. And then on the test side, after we get back our response, once again, we're parsing the data. We're assigning some local variables. And here we have some conditional and dynamic log statements. So I wrote the most basic ones. They're if-else statements, but you can write try, catch. You can, whatever, the world is your oyster in terms of JavaScript. I have, if my second favorite is starfruit, then I'm going to log this dynamic statement. Otherwise, I'm going to log this. And in this case, I'm logging two different statements, but you can also control your workflow. And I have a Postman set next request null, which adds a manual stop point in a collection run. So if I'm running every request in that collection, the default order of execution is waterfall order, unless you control the workflow and you use Postman set next request to say, otherwise, I'm going to set the next request to be called will be this one called more variables. And you can either put, if I didn't have null to say terminate that collection run, the parameter would be either the name of the request within the collection or the request ID. So here's a really basic conditional statement in if else. Here's another one where I have assumed data type. This is my baby way of doing schema validation. So normally you would actually have a schema, a very robust, strictly typed prescriptive guide. But in this case, I'm saying, let it be string. And I'm saying, if it is string, then I'll log this. Otherwise, I'll log this. So this is what I mean by conditional statements or conditional breakpoints if you want to actually stop the execution order. So let's clear this. In the past, we had, my second favorite was nectarine. Let's clear it. I was trying to get more exotic fruits. Okay, so now we have starfruit is my favorite, and my favorites is not a string. Okay, so my favorites. What is my favorites? I can see what echoed back here. My favorites, no, it's not a string because it's actually an object. So this is why I expected this statement to print to the console. I'm using print, but I think JavaScript is log. Yeah, sorry.
It's fine.
Okay. Okay. So a lot of stuff you can do with this humble but mighty console, my favorite feature in Postman. I'm about to move on to from console to the next feature, unless anybody yells out, and it's just Arlemy because everyone else is muted. So let's move on to mock servers. And I'm so excited that there were testers in the crowd because
so there's a quick one on the chat.
Yeah.
From, I can't see the name, from Omar, who says, what Joyce is currently describing seems to be useful for the workflow automation for the API consumers rather than debugging or testing for dev. Or am I mistaken?
That is correct. So I think Omar is talking about if you're an API producer versus an API consumer, what is the, how do you debug? And so as an API producer, I would say, Omar, is that you still need to consume your APIs to be able to isolate where the issue is being, is the root cause. And so in debugging, I didn't even describe what debugging was, but in programming, debugging is identifying the root cause of an issue and then fixing it. We are focusing most on identifying the root cause. And so in the next section after mock servers, we'll touch very briefly on monitoring and observability, which will, I think, be a little bit more applicable to API producers. But if you don't have monitoring and observability, well, first of all, you do need observability. If you don't have robust monitoring in place or logs in place, that's what we're doing here. Ideally, if you have a fragile area of the program and you kind of know it's fragile, you might have some key log statements or like handling there. And then this can help you identify where to place those statements. We ready for mocks?
Yes.
Whew. So mocks is chewy. Arlemy, I think, had another webinar where he talked about mocks for designing and prototyping. And so mocks can be used so many different ways. And in this webinar, we will talk about mocks for isolating a system under test and recreating edge cases that might be costly or time consuming to recreate in production or something like that. Okay. So mocks, let's see how we are in time. Okay. So mocks are essentially endpoints that are hosted on Postman Cloud. So I don't think we have time to walk through how to set up a mock, but we do have a nice video, a very short video that shows you how to set that up, and we can drop a link to that if actually Arlene is answering questions. Look for it on our YouTube channel. But let's expand this and see, what do we mean by isolating a system under test? So let's just see, we have 5 requests under scenario testing. And if you're not familiar with writing scripts, this is going to blow your mind. But what I have here, and I'm just going to read the titles of them without digging into it. I'm going to create a user, log that user in, get their account summary, get their account transactions, and then maybe like hit something where I see if they get rate limited. Okay, so now I'm looking in here and I'm hovering to inspect a variable. I'm going to be hitting this endpoint /user with this body. I'm pretty sure this is going to fail because, see, look, forbidden 403.
Now we can do debugging.
I know, I meant for that to happen. So fortunately, this has, first of all, 403 forbidden. We saw that earlier. And then also username already taken. So this is very helpful. Yes, because I already created a username called Lucy. So let's go ahead and Arlemy. Did I already use Arlemy? Okay, so we're going to create a new user called Arlemy and hit send. Okay, so I get back a 200. Okay, that's great. Now, what I've done in here under the test scripts and the pre-request scripts is to chain this information. So I'm going to parse you can see I'm parsing the request, what I sent in the request, but I'm parsing the response here and I'm saving collection variables like user ID. And so all throughout here, I'm going to be using that information to pass along information. I'm extracting data from one request, setting variables to use in subsequent requests. I've logged in now. I've got a 200. Okay. Let's get our account summary. Okay. Look at my bank account or Arlemy's bank account. Let's get your transactions, yada, yada. So I'm saving information and passing it along. And this is how I create scenario tests. Now, if I want to run all of these, let's go ahead and change our new user to something like plant. You can tell that there's a plant in front of me. I'm going to hit save. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this collection. So let's go to open up runner. So I'm in the bottom right and I'm going to drag this folder called scenario testing. And I expect, I want all of these. Yeah, let's go through all of them. And I'm going to run them in order. And okay. I didn't mean for this to happen, but let's check the Postman console for more info. Okay, so cannot read property user ID of undefined. So let's follow this through. And here's in collection runner is another place where you can dig more into what did Postman actually send. So I'm trying to send something to create a user. And I've hit this endpoint using plant, but my body's coming back. Well, I didn't tick the save response body, so that wasn't logged. What's going on? Arlemy, help me.
Sorry, I was looking away. What's happening?
Oh, it's okay. Okay, so I have an error in a test script. So it's in the first test script. So let's look at create user and go under it. The logs told me it's happening here. Okay, so some issue is happening where user ID is not being, okay, so maybe response is not what I want to be parsing. So see how I'm looking at this? I'm looking in the bottom at the response and it's response.user ID. Well, that should be working now.
It's not, you've not defined, oh wait, pm.response.json.response.
Let's go back to that. It says an error occurred. Wait, where did I see that error? Oh yeah.
It says it's here. Just you're forbidden.
Cannot read property user ID of undefined.
Yeah, because the answer is not that. The answer is 4 of the forbidden. So user ID is not in there.
Oh, I got forbidden again? Oh, yep. I probably used plant already. This is my creative. Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. So 403 forbidden. I was looking at the wrong thing. So here's 2 ways that you could have seen that. One is you could have seen it in the runner. So this is slightly different. This pane is slightly different. You can see all the information. I was drilling into what actually sent, but you can also see the metadata here. One other place is when you run stuff, when you run requests, you can see all of that in this console, in the regular request builder, as well as collection runner. So down here, I can see this metadata here. I'm in the bottom right, 403, and here's 403. And if I go here to this call, I can update did I use plant already? Am I having a stroke? I'm going to say, I'm looking at Arlemi's face, glasses. I'm so sorry. Okay, so let me close some of these tabs. Somebody's going to socially engineer my passwords now by knowing what's exactly around my desk. Okay, let's try this one more time. What's happening? Oh,
forbidden.
I wonder if let's see if it, so I'm digging into the request body, glasses. So interesting. What do we think is going on here?
The server side is not happy with what you sent to it for some reason.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is, I don't have oh gosh, we are running so short on time. I really want to show two more things. But this is part of the debugging process. I think I'm glad it's failing because this is what I would be looking at. And I would be looking at 403. I would be looking at what actually sent in the body. I would be inspecting the response. And if I said I hadn't logged the response here, but there is a check mark or a check box in the collection runner that allows you to log the response. For optimization, the response body is not logged. So if I were to open up runner again, this is the save responses. And this is one where I think if I'm not sure, I know what's going on. It's 403 forbidden. And I knew what it looked like before, but if I had a more complicated response anticipated, I would check this. Okay, so one thing I didn't even hit yet is when rate limited. So this is one of the best reasons to use a mock. We haven't even hit a mock yet. Okay, so I already spun up a mock already, and you can see by the URL formation that this is a mock that's hosted on Postman servers, and I'm hitting /birds endpoint because that's what I set up. Let's go ahead and hit send, and I can see that I get back a 429, too many requests, and I see the message. So how would I hit this endpoint? How would I get this response in production? If I know that my API rate limits 15 calls per minute, or I don't even know, whatever it is, like, am I sitting there trying to incur 15? Am I trying to trigger it by actually hitting the rate limit? Well, that can be costly, and I'm sure your devs do not want that. And so what you can do is you can stub out a scenario. So I am using this as my starting point for what I would expect the user to go through next. So I get this, and maybe additional actions, API actions are taken, and then I come back to this. So in this case, I'm saying let's plop this in the middle of our user flow. So I have scenario tests. This is something that typically happens, but what happens when the user is rate limited? What happens in subsequent tests? And so in this case, I'm subbing in like a rate limit scenario, and I can use this as the starting point, or I can use this in the middle of my scenario test. But sometimes you have third-party services. Say it's not just your own servers, but you're creating resources on third-party services. Are you paying for that in a test scenario? So maybe you stub out what's coming from the third-party service or microservices. Postman engineering uses mocks for stubbing out what's coming from other services when you're isolating the system under test, your microservice. Okay. All right. I want to make sure we get to, that went fast. And I did not even have a chance to get to Newman and the monitor, but I will go over that in the slides. So let me just quickly switch over to, oh yeah. Okay. So we didn't even talk about what is debugging. I briefly mentioned it verbally, but like you don't have it in front of your face. So let's talk through debugging strategies. Okay, so there's lots of different debugging strategies, but I've just boiled everything down into 3 general buckets on a spectrum. You start with brute force. You start with brute force where you're tweaking everything. You're just like, you don't know what's going on. You're like a deer on asphalt. You're logging everything. You're trying everything, and you really have no method, but you might stumble across the issue and you might be able to fix it by chance. So brute force totally works in some cases, but it's not super efficient. Then you have backtracking. And backtracking is seeing, I see the issue here, and now I'm going to work back from there to find out exactly where the error is. And I called it backtracking in this bucket, but it's also stepping through and using those conditional breakpoints to see, okay, I'm starting at the beginning or from a place where I know here's expected API behavior. And now here's the next step, inspecting variables. Here's the next step, inspecting variables. We actually did that when we were going through pre-request script, body, and test scripts. And lastly is divide and conquer. And again, it's divide and conquer, but some, binary search is a search algorithm that says, here, I have this code base. Let's just split it in half. And if I don't see the issue here, I know that it must have happened in the second half. Split it in half and so forth. And then with that, you narrow your search. And similarly, problem simplification by removing complexity. We saw that when we're stubbing out external dependencies. So if you have a microservices system and you're stubbing out different services, it's not that, because I know exactly what I'm getting back from the mock. You're simplifying all the different inputs going into a system. So that's isolating the system under test. Whew, that was whirlwind, but that's 3 general categories of debugging. And let's review the tools and tactics, because we did go a little bit fast. We had those 3 folders in that collection aligned by features in Postman. You have your client, and you can inspect all the pieces of your request and your response in Postman, specifically HTTP status codes and error messages. There is also the ability to see your history. So we saw a history in the console, but there's also a tab on the main sidebar that allows you to just see all the history of calls that are being made within that workspace. The second folder was console. And again, that's a great place for network calls, all of your different log statements. You can further inspect variables. You can validate execution order and set conditional breakpoints. So we looked at the Postman console, but if you're on the Electron app, the packaged app for Mac, Windows, or Linux, there's also a DevTools console that you might know about. Some of our power users use DevTools, Postman DevTools instead of Postman console. And the primary difference there is if you're uncertain, is this unexpected behavior Postman, or is it this API I'm working with, or is it me? There's additional logs and additional visibility. If you are not a Postman power user, or you don't, for 99% of people, I would recommend using the Postman console. If you're submitting a support ticket and our team, Postman, needs more visibility, they might ask you to go into DevTools for more logs, but almost everyone on this call should be using Postman console. And the last folder in that collection was mock servers. We recreated 429. I do know there's teams that recreate hitting rate limits, because they want to see if I drop hitting a rate limit, how does that impact the rest of my flow? And just stubbing out dependencies. You can use a mock either as a starting point for your scenario testing in the middle, or just to simplify, problem simplification. That was under the divide and conquer debugging strategy. Okay, so those 3 features are great for a single call, but what about when you have a sequence of calls? So running that entire scenario testing folder, you have the runner, which we looked at. You saw that those same calls get logged in the console. There's also a history that you can replay. So in the history tab, you can see a history of all your single requests being sent, but also entire collection runs. And you can actually export that as data if you wanted to send it to a colleague or something. And by default, the responses are not logged, but we saw where you can check to preserve those responses. And monitors and webhooks and Newman are other ways to run collections. So monitors is a collection run hosted on Postman Cloud. Postman runs it for you. And monitors have a separate console. So I've talked about like so many consoles. There's the main console. There's the DevTools console, which you can immediately forget about. And then there's also monitors. Monitors has a separate console and history. And webhooks are essentially monitors under the hood. So that's why I have it under the same bullet point here. And Newman, we didn't have a chance to get to Newman, but we have other webinars where we've gone over Newman. Newman is the command line runner. So if you have a continuous integration pipeline, you might be using Newman in your in your CI environment to run collections. So there's CLI output when you're running it from your command line. Those log statements get logged to your command line interface. And if you wanted further logs, you would you can output JSON files again to replicate that collection run. I will give a shout out to my colleague Danny Dainton, who created HTML Extra. You can actually output very pretty HTML files. And so you can send those HTML files to somebody who has a web browser and they can view the collection run results. Okay. The last bit I'll talk about is working with your favorite tools and the integrations that Postman has around different types of monitoring and alerting. So on your homepage of Postman, on the left, you should see a tab called Integrations. And this is just a screenshot, so I wish I could scroll here. But Postman has a ton of tools that you can integrate with. You can back up collections, you can back up API schemas, you can bring your pipeline builds to Postman, you can view metrics. So let's go over to one more. Something that is new, if you haven't seen integrations lately, take a look at the integrations page because you can browse at a glance all the different tools. And if you're like, yep, I use that, and then you can check it out. But this is rather new. So if you're using an API schema like OpenAPI or RAML or something like that, if you're using an API schema in Postman, there's a whole new flavor of integrations that's very exciting. So under the test tab, deployments and monitoring, there's a few different tools that we now integrate with. So if you're writing your test suites and you're kicking off a deployment, you're able to run your tests and see the results directly in Postman. Okay, so I do have a slide to kind of summarize that. We talked very briefly about monitoring and observability. So there's lots of different integrations that are, we've always had integrations, but there's a lot of new ones that have come within the last probably 3 months. So check that out. If you don't want one of the pre-built integrations or your team has already used so many that you've taken up your limit for your Postman plan, you can always roll your own. We talked about Postman monitors running from Postman Cloud, webhooks, which are monitors under the hood. And we have the Postman API where you have access to all of your Postman stuff so you can roll your own solutions.
Cool.
I'm so sorry. That was very fast talking. It was. Yeah.
But I mean, we needed all that to learn everything that we wanted to go through. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again. Give Joyce some time to breathe. She's been talking a lot. But yeah, if we look back at everything that that you've done mostly, because I was just answering questions at the same time, this is what ideally you've learned. So I know one of the things that we didn't get to go through was running the collections, and I think some of the viewers helps as well. I think there were just some people that were faster than you at taking the names that you wanted to use, and therefore every time. Because I then tried on my end with like other username and it worked fine. And I know
somebody used plant.
I know some viewers were saying in the chat that they got it to work as well.
Okay.
So yeah, it was probably just some very fast people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not gonna go through all of these points because I wanna have some time to look at the other slides. But that's basically the same points that we saw at the beginning about what you were meant to learn, and obviously. We hope you've learned all that. If not, we also give you some extra documentation that you can go and check out. And let's have a look at that after this one. This one is just to give you a taste of what's coming up in Postman. We've talked a lot about debugging tools and tactics here, but there's more to Postman. One of them is uptime monitoring. So this one is around the same idea, but it's kind of getting a status of your API. It's just going to give you a nice graph of when your API is up, etc. That's coming up. We have what you see is what you get documentation. So you've seen Joyce showing documentation, reading documentation. As of now, when you write that documentation, it's using Markdown. So you'll be able to just do it just as if you were writing a Google Docs, for example. We have a super admin functionality coming up. So it's basically you being the super admin of your workspace. You have all of the rights. You can do all of the things. So if you're working in a team setting and you want to have someone that has the superpowers, then you'll be able to do it. And there's more. If you want to learn more, there's a little link at the bottom here. Go.pstm.io/public roadmap. You can go and check it out. We try to keep it up to date with whatever is coming up in the. Did you have something to say?
I will say that uptime monitoring, but monitoring in general is so important to debugging. If you have a good, robust monitoring system in place, that makes debugging so much easier. So we're doing as if we have nothing and we're just exploring as a consumer. But if you know that there's fragile areas, set up those tests, have dynamic log statements so that you're able to see a little bit better, see quicker what's happening instead of manually doing those brute force methods.
Yep. And I see we're just going at the hour. We'll go a bit above because I do want to go through what's left. If you need to drop, that's fine. Again, the recording is going to be available. A few additional resources that I mentioned. The first one is the Postman Space Camp. That's where you were to fork the collection at the start. You may have seen there's more collections in there. They've all been created for other webinars that you can find also on the Postman Space Camp page. So go out there, check them out. There's different topics. We mentioned there was one around like API design. There's one around like testing specifically. There's plenty of topics that may be relevant to you. 30 Days of Postman for Developers. It's a 30-day challenge created by Joyce to kind of learn different features of Postman, but kind of gamified. So you get a different challenge every day. It's pretty fast. It shouldn't take you like more than 10 minutes per day. And then at the end, you get a nice badge. So there's that. The community forum. I know I've started like to redirect quite a few people to the community forum in the Q&A because some of the questions are better asked there because there's more people, but also because like sharing code on Zoom is not practical. So if you have more advanced questions, I know there was plenty of questions around like asynchronous requests, etc. Go and ask it there. There's plenty of people, including us there, who can help. And then we have the Postman Answers workspace, where there's different collections helping you that you can fork that have like pre-made requests to do certain things. So for example, again, coming to asynchronous requests, I know we have a collection that shows how to do parallel requests, series requests, etc. in there. That could be useful. With that said, let's jump into the Q&A quickly. I'm very glad I got to answer a lot of questions during the webinar because they kept on coming.
Thank you, Arlemi.
There's not that many left now, but I'll take a few that are left. Is there a good documentation on how to Postman pull request works with fork collection? Yes. If you go to the Learning Center, which is learning.postman.com, and search for version control, you'll find that in there. There's like a whole page that says everything about version control. I'm just trying to see if I have it in my clipboard, but doesn't look like it is. But yeah, the Learning Center in general has like most of the answers that you may be looking for. We also have a video on the Postman channel about version control that may be helpful that you might want to check out. Dvir is saying, please add a pull request option to resolve conflicts or choose what to merge. I'm pretty sure it's already there. If not, it's coming soon. But we should be able to handle that. If I need to test a SOAP service using the XML post, can I get a test automation? Yeah, you can pass your XML the same way you pass your JSON, and you can test it the same way. That shouldn't be an issue. And then last question for me today, is there a way to force the storage of environment variable locally? I don't want the environment variables to be set in cloud, but only on my machine. By default, I think they will be set as current value, which is local anyway. So if I'm not mistaken. So that should be, by default, that should be saved locally unless you persist the variables, and then it makes it to to the shared value.
Or you write to your local file system.
Oh, you can write to your local file system if you'd rather.
By having a server running on your local system.
Yeah, there's more to it, but it can be done. So yeah, I've answered plenty of questions as well around like pattern matching for mock servers, tests in general, like splitting values or getting values and passing them to other places, or asynchronous requests, etc. You can check that. We'll probably publish them to the SpaceCamp page as well, because I know there was like plenty of questions around the same thing. But just before you leave, if you have just a couple of minutes to write down that URL, you don't need to answer right now, but write it down. Give us your feedback, because that's valuable and helps us making like better webinar coming up. So yeah, any feedback you may have, put it in there. We'll be reading it for sure. I just
dropped a link in the chat.
And there's a link in the chat now, so that's good. Makes it even easier. You can just click on it. Oh, you can't click on it, actually. It's not clickable, but you can copy paste it. That's fine. And yeah, put your feedback there. We greatly appreciate. And with that said, thank you, Joyce, for going through all this. Thank you all for watching. And we'll see you for another webinar another time. Bye-bye.
Yeah, goodbye.